Our first speaker is Frank Brennan, lawyer, Jesuit priest and long-term advocate for social justice, refugee protection and Aboriginal reconciliation. His most recent book is No Small Change, The Road to Recognition for Indigenous Australia, and he's going to be talking about that in more detail tomorrow. But now, to talk about what he believes, please join me in welcoming Frank Brennan.
Good evening. Thanks, Anne. I believe it's a privilege and a blessing to be able to gather at an event such as this with such a diversity of views, with such extraordinary talents, where we will be able to discuss or put before you what we believe without fear of violence, perhaps with a little humour, but probably not too much mocking, but with civil respect. I also think it's a privilege and a blessing that I can put my case. It's not every time that a Jesuit has the opportunity to preach in the Sydney Opera House to 2,000 people. Nothing like having a captive congregation. But I do believe that there's not only a place for fun and play, but also for very serious engagement when we come to belief. One of my most fundamental beliefs came home to me in the last couple of days when I beheld that little child, Helen Razer, swept up on the beach there in Turkey. I believe in his inviolable, inherent dignity. That's a fundamental core belief for me, though at times it's very difficult. I believe there truly is evil in the world, which undermines the inherence of that dignity. But I think that we humans have an untold capacity for good, and that we can act beyond our self-interest, and we often do. I believe we confront enormous challenges in a globe of 7.3 billion people, with almost 60 million displaced, as we deal with issues like climate change, inequality, and I think the greatest moral challenge that we confront in a country like Australia is the question of our national borders, our complete isolation. As Le Monde, I was reminded in Brisbane today, wrote recently, Australia is strange because Australians are strangers to the world. I believe it's a privilege and a blessing to have multiple affiliations. I'm a Catholic priest, but I would hate to live in a theocracy. I would hate to have my life completely governed by the Vatican or by any pope, no matter how good or bad he or she might be. I think it's great that one can have multiple affiliations, particularly as a citizen in a robust pluralist democracy like this. And with those multiple affiliations, I believe that we're called to profess huge ideals and to admit human limitation. When we religious people do that, it's often thought that we should end up either as martyrs or labelled as hypocrites. But I believe we're all capable of espousing very noble ideals, though admitting that we are indeed very flawed individuals. I believe that we're open to the transcendent, but we are ultimately and fully grounded in our own material being. I believe we live in a society where the individual, where human rights, where self-determination and non-discrimination are usually trumps. But I don't believe that's enough. I believe that notions of community, the common good and the public interest are equally essential and have to be triumphed in a democracy such as Australia. I believe that some religious figures, like the present Pope Francis, can be good news and not just for religious believers. When he does something like go to Lampedusa, when he asks, who am I to judge? Where he's able to hold together, like having all those balls in the air at one time, care for creation, concern for the poor and marginalised, commitment to the common good, and a deep interior peace. I believe that one of the great challenges for our society at this time is that, of course, religion has lost much of its appeal, but that in part is the postmodern phenomenon where notions such as tradition, authority, ritual and community have fallen away. That we prefer to engage in an individual quest for meaning and transcendence. But ultimately we find that as an individual quest it fails. I believe that all of us are ultimately driven and seeking a sense of belonging and relationship, not just with humanity, but with the creation, and it's where we draw our inspiration, particularly from scientists like Peter Doherty, from whom we'll hear, from philosophers like A.C. Grayling, who'll also speak, and from the great musicians and artists in our world. I believe that politics matters because those of us who have conflicting comprehensive worldviews ultimately have to resolve matters civilly, and that can only be done through politics. But it'll come as no surprise to hear me say that I think that law also matters, and so do constitutional arrangements. And that's why I passionately believe that we should recognise Aborigines in our constitution. I think such recognition matters not only to them, I think it matters to all of us as a nation to own who we are, to own our history, and to own our true future. I believe that human rights matter. I believe that the cross-fertilisation of ideas is essential. And I believe that the notions of interdependence and solidarity can drive a real vision for change. When I think back on the life of that little boy, Helen Razer, and I contemplate the contrast of politicians, Angela Merkel over against Tony Abbott and Bill Shorten, I think to myself that it's essential that we be a society that seeks to produce leaders who are more humane, more noble, more worthy, and dare I say, more blessed. I believe that each of us can make a difference by enacting a comprehensive worldview which accounts for the inherent, inviolable dignity of everyone, including Helen Razer. It's a privilege and a blessing for us to enjoy the fruits of the good life here behind secure national borders. I believe we must do more to share the fruits of that protection with those on the other side of those borders. And in doing so, I believe we should always express our gratitude, particularly to those who most disagree with us, because it's only in civil argument that we will honour a politics which can work for true justice for all, including those who are most marginalised, including those of the future generations. That's why I believe faith matters, I believe politics matters, law matters, and even constitutional arrangements. And together with our multiple affiliations, I think we can make not only Australia, but the world a much better place. Thank you very much.